Okay, so you want to own a rental car fleet. On paper, this feels like the easiest business in the world. Buy some cars, hand out the keys, and collect cash while people drive them around. 10 cars in a parking lot, 10 sets of keys, and money rolling in every time someone needs a ride for the weekend. No product to build, no factory, nothing to invent. Except that's not actually how this business works. Not even close. In 2020, Hertz filed for bankruptcy. Everyone assumed it was because nobody was renting cars during the pandemic. That's not what actually broke the company. Hertz was sitting on close to $15 billion in debt tied directly to its fleet, financing called asset-backed securities. In plain terms, Hertz had borrowed against the cars themselves, and the size of the monthly payment moved with what those cars were worth on the used market. When fewer people wanted to buy used cars during the pandemic, the value backing that debt dropped. The payments didn't drop with it. Hertz wasn't crushed by empty parking lots. It was crushed by a loan that was quietly betting on the used car market every single month. And this isn't some one-time fluke from a weird year. It's still happening. In 2025, Avis posted a loss of roughly $995 million, and a big chunk of that came from writing down the value of its electric vehicle fleet. Cars that cost a fortune to buy suddenly weren't worth nearly as much when Avis went to sell them. So here's the part nobody tells you when you picture owning a rental fleet. The rentals themselves are rarely where you lose money. The cars are where you lose money. Think about it this way. Every car you buy for a fleet starts losing value the second you drive it off the lot, whether anyone rents it or not. You're not just renting out transportation. You're holding a pile of depreciating assets and hoping you can sell them before the market turns against you. The daily rental is just the side hustle that keeps the car earning a little cash while you wait for your exit. So really, a rental car company isn't a car rental business at all. It's a used car speculation business that happens to rent out its inventory while it waits to sell. And once you see it that way, everything about this industry starts to make a lot more sense, including who wins and who gets buried. There's a trick the big companies use to make that depreciation risk predictable instead of terrifying, something called a program car. We'll get into exactly how that works. There's also an ordinary person with 2 or 3 cars in their driveway making more money per car than Hertz does per car, and we'll show you the real numbers. And there's a specific, very ordinary way regular fleet owners get blindsided, not by renters, but by their own bank, sometimes in the middle of an active rental. By the end of this, you'll know exactly what a fleet actually costs, how the money really moves through this business, and where it's genuinely possible to make it work. So you've bought the cars, now what? How do you actually turn a row of parked cars into a paycheck? It depends on the scale you're starting at, and the gap between those scales is enormous. Say you're going small. A single independent lot with 10 used economy cars, the kind of business one person could run. Those cars run you $15,000 to $25,000 each. A Toyota Corolla Hybrid, one of the most rented cars in America, sits around $23,000. Multiply that out, and you're looking at $150,000 to $250,000 just for the fleet itself. And here's the part people miss. That fleet isn't a slice of your startup cost. It is your startup cost, 60 to 70% of everything you spend to open the doors. Add insurance, a lot lease, signage, a bit of software to track bookings, and a smaller 5 to 10 car version of this same business lands around $100,000 to $200,000 total. Now compare that to going the franchise route, say with a name brand you already know from the airport counter. Franchise fees alone run $10,000 on the low end, up to $125,000, just to use the name in the system. Then the real number hits. Fleet acquisition for a franchise location runs anywhere from $450,000 to over $15 million, depending on how big a territory you're buying into. And the spending doesn't stop once you open. You owe the franchisor royalties, 4 to 8% of your gross revenue, every single month, whether you had a good month or not. On top of that, 2 to 4% more goes to marketing fees, funding ad campaigns you don't get to choose. So the franchise buys you a recognizable name and a playbook. The independent lot buys you freedom and a much smaller bill. Here's the thing almost nobody outside the industry realizes. Barely anyone pays cash for these fleets, not even close. Operators use something called fleet floor plan financing, which is basically a revolving loan built specifically for buying vehicles in bulk. It works a lot like a car dealership's financing. You draw money to buy a batch of cars, and you owe monthly payments on that balance. Bigger players use asset-backed lending instead, where they bundle hundreds or thousands of vehicles together and borrow against the whole pile at once. Either way, the mechanism is the same, and it matters more than anything else in this business. The cars themselves are the collateral. Not your house, not your savings. The car's sitting in the lot right now, which means the bank isn't really betting on you as an operator. It's betting on what those specific cars will be worth later. And that bet isn't the same for every car. A Toyota Corolla Hybrid at $23,000 is a very different risk than a Mercedes E-Class at around $60,000. The Mercedes rents for more per day, sure, but it also costs almost 3 times as much to finance, insure, and eventually sell off. So before a single customer ever rents a single car, your entire financial position is already locked in by a loan tied to vehicles that depreciate the moment you drive them off the lot. Which brings up the obvious question. If the cars themselves are basically a loan you're gambling on, how does the actual rental money work? And that's the stuff on the invoice. What about the costs that never make it onto a P&L slide? Every car you own has one job: earn its keep every single day it's parked in that lot. Rental companies call this utilization rate, and it's the single number that decides if you make money or lose it. A car sitting empty in the lot isn't neutral. It's actively losing you money, because the loan payment on it doesn't pause just because nobody rented it that day. Successful operators run their fleet at 65 to 80% utilization, meaning out of every 10 cars, 2 to 3 sit idle on any given day, and that's considered healthy. Drop below that, say into the 40s or 50s, and most operators start bleeding cash even while every car on the lot looks busy on paper. So here's the actual daily math. Say you rent a Toyota Corolla for $45 a day. Your cost of owning that car for the day, financing payment, insurance, maintenance all divided out, might run you $25 to $30. That leaves you $15 to $20 of margin, but only on the days it's actually rented. Empty days, you just eat the $25 to $30, full stop. Now here's what almost nobody tells you when they picture this business. The sticker price on the rental is not the real revenue. Insurance upsells, the counter agent asking if you want the collision waiver can add $15 to $30 a day, and most renters say yes out of fear. Fuel service charges hit anyone who doesn't return the tank full, often at double or triple the price of a gas station. Then there's mileage overages, late return fees, and upgrade fees when someone walks in wanting a bigger car than what they booked. Stack all of that together and ancillary revenue often adds up to 20 to 30% on top of the base rental rate. So that $45 rental might actually be closer to $55 or $60 once everything gets added on, and that gap is where a lot of the real profit hides. Now remember that open loop about the trick big rental companies use to control depreciation? Here's how it actually works. Some cars in the fleet are bought as what the industry calls program cars, purchased directly from the manufacturer under a repurchase agreement. That means the manufacturer promises, in writing, to buy the car back at a set price after 6 to 12 months, no matter what the used market does. It's like buying a phone with a guaranteed trade-in value locked in before you even open the box. The depreciation risk basically disappears. Other cars are risk cars, bought outright with no buyback deal, which means when it's time to sell, the company gets whatever the used car market is willing to pay. If demand for used sedans craters the way it did in 2020, a risk car can sell for thousands less than the fleet manager ever planned for. So 2 identical-looking Corollas on the same lot can carry completely different financial risk, and the renter behind the counter has no idea which one they just drove off in. So who actually gets stuck holding the bag on this? And why does it happen to smart operators who did everything else right? Here's the number that surprises almost everyone. Depreciation, not insurance, not repairs, is the single biggest expense on a rental fleet's books. An economy car like that Corolla loses about 10 to 12% of its value every single year, just sitting there existing. Move up to an SUV, a minivan, or anything with a bigger engine, and depreciation can run 10 to 20% a year or more. Do that math on a $25,000 car, and you're looking at $2,500 to $5,000 vanishing before a single wrench turns or a single claim gets filed. Stack that against insurance and maintenance combined, and depreciation still usually wins. It's not close. And insurance itself isn't cheap either. Fleet insurance means commercial liability plus physical damage coverage, and it costs dramatically more than the policy on your own car at home. Why? Because renters crash rental cars far more often than owners crash their own, and insurers price that risk right into the premium. Then there's the stuff between renters nobody puts on a brochure. Cleaning, oil changes, tire wear, a cracked windshield, a stain that needs a professional detail. Multiply that by hundreds of turnovers a year across a fleet, and reconditioning alone becomes a full-time cost center, not a rounding error. But none of that is the real trap. The real trap is what happens when the used car market itself turns against you. Every fleet vehicle is financed against its expected resale value. That value is a guess, and guesses can be wrong at the worst possible time. In 2020, used car prices dropped fast and hard, all at once, across the entire industry, with nowhere to hide. That wasn't just bad news, it was a financial emergency. Hertz's financing was built on asset-backed securities, basically loans backed by the cars themselves as collateral. Those loan agreements had covenants, rules that trigger extra payments if the collateral's value falls too far, too fast. In April of 2020, Hertz had to inject roughly $135 million in emergency cash into its financing program just to stay compliant and keep the money flowing. Not because a single rental counter closed, not because customers stopped calling, because the used car market moved, and the loan documents demanded a response. This is the whole paradox laid bare. The risk on a rental fleet doesn't live at the counter where the keys change hands. It lives 3 steps removed, in resale values nobody at the front desk can see or control. You can run a perfect location, hit 80% utilization, and still get blindsided by a bank calling in a covenant over used car prices. So if it can work that well, how do so many owners still lose their shirt? Start with the biggest rental car bet in recent history, because it went almost exactly backward. In 2021, fresh out of bankruptcy, Hertz agreed to buy 100,000 Teslas, mostly Model 3S, aiming to have a big chunk of its fleet electric within a couple of years. The stock popped, the headlines wrote themselves, and Hertz looked like it had figured out the future of car rental. Then the actual costs of running electric cars as rentals started showing up. Collision and repair costs on the Teslas ran roughly double what a comparable gas car cost to fix. A cracked bumper or a busted sensor on an EV isn't a quick body shop job, it's a specialized repair with specialized parts and a long wait. Every day that car sits in a repair bay, it's not renting, and the financing payment on it doesn't pause. Meanwhile, Tesla kept cutting prices on new cars, which crushed the resale value of Hertz's used ones. Remember the math from before. Depreciation is already the biggest expense on a rental fleet, and now it was getting worse by the month. By 2024, Hertz had reversed course and started selling off about 20,000 of those EVs, at a loss, straight into a soft used EV market. That single bet is a real chunk of the write-downs that dragged the industry into a loss near $1 billion as recently as 2025. Now look at the opposite end of the business, running on a fraction of the capital. On Turo, the peer-to-peer car-sharing app, an ordinary person can list their own car and keep somewhere between 60 and 90% of what each trip pays. No corporate fleet office, no franchise royalty, no lot full of unsold Teslas, just a car, an app, and a driveway. Turo's top individual hosts, the ones who run their cars well and keep them booked, pull in somewhere between $1,000 and $3,000 a month per car. In 2024 alone, Turo paid its hosts about $1.5 billion out of roughly $2.5 billion in total bookings on the platform. Turo itself is on pace for close to $1 billion in platform revenue in 2025, just for running the marketplace, not owning a single car. Same asset, a car that depreciates and needs insurance, working at a totally different scale, with none of the debt structure that sank Hertz's bet. One operator bought 100,000 cars on a bet about the future and got buried by depreciation and repair costs. The other bought one car, kept it booked, and kept the keys. Okay, so strip away the corporate balance sheets for a second. What actually wrecks an ordinary owner trying to do this? It usually starts with paperwork nobody reads. Most personal auto loans and leases have a clause banning commercial use, and that includes car sharing. Turo's own terms say the same thing. It's on you to make sure renting out your car doesn't break your loan agreement. So a bank finances your car assuming you'll drive it to work and back. The second you list it on Turo, you've technically broken the deal. Here's the part almost nobody knows. Lenders now run what amounts to car sharing detection, scanning rental apps for license plates tied to loans they hold. There are documented cases of hosts getting repossessed mid-rental, not for missing a payment. Every payment was on time. One woman had her financed car towed away with a renter's belongings still inside it, over a clause she never noticed at signing. A repossession like that doesn't just cost you the car. It shows up on your credit report as a breach of contract, which makes your next loan much harder to get. That's the small-scale version. Zoom out, and it's the exact same mechanism that took down Hertz, just wearing a different outfit. Growing a fleet on borrowed money only works if the rental income keeps pace with the debt payment. Most owners grow the fleet first and hope the bookings follow. The financing payment doesn't care if the car is booked. It's due whether that car rented for 20 days last month or for 4. So the moment demand softens, even a little, the fixed cost of the loan eats straight into cash the business doesn't have. That's the whole story of Hertz's asset-backed debt, just shrunk down to one guy with 5 cars and one bank that can pull the plug. And the survival numbers back this up directly. Franchise rental operations report about a 92% survival rate in their first year. Independent operators, the ones building a fleet on their own financing with no corporate structure behind them, survive their first year at closer to 62%. That gap isn't about who picks better cars. It's about who matched their debt to real demand and who just guessed. So the lesson isn't don't finance a fleet. It's that the loan on your fleet is a bet on utilization, and most people never actually run that math before signing. Okay, so strip all that away. What can you actually walk away with? So, with all of that on the table, what does the real math look like? Well, before we get to the math, there's one lever most owners never touch. What kind of cars they actually buy. Most independent lots fill up with the same boring economy cars because they're cheap and easy to resell. But mix in a few SUVs or a Mercedes E-Class, and you can charge 2, sometimes 3 times the daily rate for the same parking spot. EVs are trickier. In a city with solid charging coverage, a Tesla can pull a premium rate and rent itself out on novelty alone. Drop that same EV in a market without chargers, and you get what happened to Hertz, a car nobody wants to drive, sitting dead on the lot. The lesson isn't avoid EVs, it's match the car to the market, because the wrong car in the wrong city is depreciation with extra steps. There's a second lever, and it's bigger. Stop betting every day on someone walking up to your counter. Corporate and long-term rental contracts, insurance replacement deals, construction crews needing a truck for 6 weeks, lock in a car for weeks or months at a time. That's not exciting money, but it's utilization you don't have to fight for every single morning. And utilization is the whole game, remember. A car under contract at 90% utilization beats a flashy car sitting empty 2 days out of 5 waiting for walk-in traffic. Then there's the format almost nobody in this business talks about, skipping the lot entirely. Turo-style peer-to-peer renting means no storefront lease, no counter staff, no franchise royalty eating 4 to 8% of your revenue. The platform handles the insurance, the payment processing, even the ID checks. You just own the car and manage the calendar. That's why an ordinary person with 2 or 3 cars on Turo can out-earn per car what a corporate Hertz lot pulls in, with a fraction of the overhead. This is, realistically, the version of this business most people watching this could actually start this year, with 1 car and a Saturday afternoon. So, with all of that on the table, what does the real math look like? Let's put real numbers on both versions of this, starting small. 5 cars, Turo style, no lot, no office, just you and an app. 5 used cars at 20 grand each. Blended, puts you in for $100,000 total, financing included. If each car nets around $1,500 a month after Turo's cut, insurance, upkeep, and the loan payment, that's $7,500 a month across the fleet. Run that math forward, and you're looking at payback in 14 to 16 months, but only if utilization holds near 70%. Drop to 50% utilization, and that same fleet might take over 2 years to pay back, because the loan payment doesn't care if the car sat idle. Now scale it up. 50 cars, a franchise, or a serious independent lot. 20 grand a car blended average. That's over $1 million in fleet alone before rent or payroll. At 50 to 80% utilization with insurance upsells, mileage fees and late fees stacked on top, the margin per car, per day, is real. But now you're also paying royalties of 4 to 8% of gross revenue. Marketing fees on top of that, a lot lease, and a counter staff. Those fixed costs eat into the same math that made the 5-car fleet pay back fast, so payback stretches to 3 or 4 years, not 14 months. Same asset, same used cars, same rental checks coming in, but the overhead changes the timeline by years, not months. That's the actual lesson hiding under all of it. Scale doesn't automatically mean better returns, it means more moving parts that can each go wrong on their own. The 5-car owner competing on Turo is closer to the real profit engine than the 50-car lot drowning in royalty checks and lease payments. Go back to Hertz for a second. Over 500,000 cars on the books, and it still went bankrupt in 2020 because the financing broke, not because nobody wanted to rent a car. More cars just means more exposure to the same risk, at a size where one bad year in the used car market turns into a 9-figure write-down. So here's the paradox again, the one we opened with. You didn't buy a fleet of cars. You bought several $100,000 of used car market exposure, and it just happens to come with a set of keys attached.